You are kneeling on the cold, unyielding planks of a cypress floor. The light in the room is fading, surrendering to the deepening shadows of an autumn evening. You hear the slow, methodical crunch of wooden sandals on the gravel outside the thin paper shoji screens. The heavy, bitter scent of ash from the burning keep still hangs in the damp air, a lingering ghost of the world you once knew. It is the 21st day of the 10th month, the year 1600. The great battle has ended. The banners of your clan have fallen in the mud, but for you, the true terror is only just beginning. You stand perfectly still, your heavy silk robes stained with the dust of collapse, waiting in the suffocating silence. There is no weeping. There is only the shallow, ragged breathing of the women beside you, gathered like porcelain statues in the dark. Every distant shout, every clatter of armor, sends a wave of cold dread through the room. The heavy wooden doors slide open with a slow, agonizing groan, and the flickering torchlight catches the polished lacquer armor of the victors. They do not speak. They do not need to. They simply gesture toward the waiting, windowless palanquins lined up in the courtyard below. You step forward, the fabric of your sleeves whispering against the tatami mats, leaving behind everything you have ever been. What followed would shape their lives in ways few outside the palace ever understood. This was not random chaos. This wasn't an oversight of war. This was not the frenzied aftermath of a battlefield where law had dissolved into base instinct. It was policy. The taking of captive women by the victorious samurai lords was a calculated, efficient institution. As the ashes settled over the ruined provinces, the new military government did not leave the fate of noble women to chance. They engineered a bureaucracy of displacement. Every woman of rank, every daughter, sister, and wife of the defeated warlords was catalogued with terrifying precision. Scribes sat in quiet, sunlit rooms, their ink brushes moving steadily over thick mulberry paper, recording names, lineages, ages, and designated destinations. The women were no longer individuals. They were assets, political leverage, and living symbols of absolute conquest. They were absorbed into a vast system that demanded the complete and total erasure of their past identities. This was the normalization of captivity. The ledgers kept by the shogunate detailed the transfer of these women as if they were grain, timber, or weaponry. They were relocated to heavily guarded compounds, forced into the households of the very men who had ordered the slaughter of their fathers and husbands. What history records is the triumph of the new rulers, the grand unification of the land under a single, unyielding banner. What wasn't written down was the cold procedure that turned living, breathing heirs of proud clans into mere commodities of the state. It was a system built on total isolation and enforced dependency. The conquerors understood that to truly defeat an enemy, you must own their bloodline. You must sever the deep roots of their ancient legacy. To uncover these hidden truths, to shine a light into the darkest corners of human history, where the truth is deeply buried in the archives, you must look beyond the official narratives. If you are committed to understanding the true cost of ancient empires, subscribe to the Dark Inquest History YouTube channel. We delve into the forgotten corridors of the past, bringing to light the stories that were not erased by time, but by design. Join us as we uncover what they don't teach in the standardized history books. Zooming in on the human cost, we must look away from the grand political stage and focus on the quiet, claustrophobic rooms where these women were held. Consider the daughters of the fallen clans, women who had been raised to master poetry, the tea ceremony, and the subtle arts of court diplomacy, now reduced to prisoners of status. They endured severe mistreatment, not always through physical harm, but through the crushing weight of psychological subjugation. They were forced to wear the colors of their captors, forced to serve in the inner chambers of enemy fortresses, their every movement watched by loyal retainers. For many, this was a life of silent suffering behind closed doors, a daily existence marked by a profound, inescapable isolation. They were stripped of their ancestral family crests, given unfamiliar new names, and strictly forbidden from ever speaking of their heritage. In these suffocating cages, silence was their remaining defense. Silence is more powerful than screaming. A scream is a reaction, a loss of control that the captor can measure. Silence is a fortress. It is a refusal to yield the innermost sanctum of the mind. These women waited in the quiet hours of the night, listening to the muffled footsteps of guards patrolling the wooden verandas. They experienced a fear so deep and constant that it became a physical sensation, a heavy ache in the chest that never fully dissipated. Their endurance was not marked by grand rebellions, but by the subtle, quiet choices they made to preserve a fragment of their souls. Some subtly altered the patterns of their weaving to hide the insignia of their original clan. Others kept small hidden relics, a wooden comb, a faded fragment of cloth, concealed beneath the floorboards. But for many, their ultimate fate was simply to disappear into the vast, anonymous machinery of the victorious clan. They became mothers to their captors' children, their own bloodlines subsumed and violently rewritten. The psychological impact of bearing the heir of the man who destroyed your family is an abuse hidden from official records. It is a profound violation of identity, an ongoing injustice that stretched across decades of enforced domesticity. These were conditions no person should endure, yet they survived, carrying the heavy ghosts of their ancestors in complete, utter silence. As we navigate these silent histories together, standing witness for those whose voices were systematically taken, your presence here matters deeply. This journey into the shadows is not one to be taken lightly or alone. We walk this path of remembrance side by side, continuing this mission together to ensure that the silent endurance of these captive women is finally acknowledged by the modern world. The darkest turning point for these captive women was not the chaotic day of the battle, nor the terrifying moment of their initial capture. The true climax of their suffering arrived on the day the heavy wooden gates of the victor's inner palace, the vast and inescapable Ooku, closed behind them for the final time. This was the moment of irreversible severance. You hear the heavy thud of timber doors, the sliding of iron bolts, the terrifying finality of the echo. The fading torches cast long, warped shadows across the inner courtyard as they were led deep into the labyrinth of the women's quarters, an opulent prison from which there was absolutely no return. This wasn't a temporary holding cell. This was a permanent, calculated burial of their past. Here, the overriding fear was not of sudden death, but of a slow, agonizing erasure. They were forced to kneel in the dim, golden light of paper lanterns and pledge absolute loyalty to the warlords who had devastated their ancestral homes. It was a moment of profound betrayal, forced upon them by the very mechanisms of sheer survival. They watched as the last remaining relics of their former lives were systematically destroyed or confiscated by the victors. A lacquered mirror box, a gift from a dead mother, casually tossed into the dirt. A final letter from a fallen brother, burned over a brazier until only ash remained. These symbolic moments of destruction marked the literal death of who they once were. They were now property. The crushing psychological weight of this transition was a harsh punishment that left invisible, permanent scars. They were surrounded by rival concubines, watchful spies, and ambitious retainers, living every day in an atmosphere of constant suspicion and forced control. Every word spoken was carefully calculated. Every subtle glance was measured. To show grief for their fallen families was deemed treason. To show defiance was to invite severe mistreatment upon the few surviving, loyal servants they had managed to keep by their side. And so they locked their memories behind a flawless facade of perfect, emotionless obedience. They walked the polished corridors like ghosts, their faces painted in stark white powder, masking the profound, unspeakable devastation beneath. The deliberate sealing of those massive palace doors was the final act of a long, deliberate process of human annihilation. It was the exact moment the world they knew officially ceased to exist. The political consequences of this systematic captivity were vast and enduring. By absorbing the noble women of defeated clans, the victorious samurai lords consolidated their regional power and completely eliminated the looming threat of future rebellions fueled by rival bloodlines. It was a masterclass in demographic manipulation and psychological warfare. The cultural memory of these women, however, was carefully and deliberately manipulated. Official court scrolls and sanctioned histories depicted them as willing, grateful participants in the new regime, praising their unyielding loyalty and elegant grace under the protection of the new shogunate. Their deep trauma was entirely sanitized, their forced submission cleanly rebranded as noble, patriotic duty. This is what they don't teach in the standard romanticized narratives of heroic samurai and honorable, glorious conflict. The true narrative is buried in the archives, hidden quietly between the dry lines of marriage registries and mundane birth records. The long-term effects on the society were subtle but profoundly deep, establishing a rigid, inescapable structure of patriarchal dominance that would endure unchallenged for centuries. Yet, despite the formidable empire's best efforts to wipe the slate clean, their story somehow survived. It survived in the melancholy, coded verses of forbidden poetry, in the hushed, whispered legends passed down through generations of loyal servants, and in the sheer, undeniable fact of their quiet endurance. They were not erased by time, but by design. Yet the meticulous design was ultimately flawed because human memory, especially the memory of profound injustice, always resists total obliteration. The silent figures in the ash-choked ruins of 1600 did not simply vanish. They learned to survive in the shadows of the men who conquered them. Their lives became a haunting testament to the quiet, terrifying strength required to endure when the entire world has been violently stolen from you. The true horror of their reality lay not in chaotic violence, but in the cold, methodical organization of their endless captivity. As we finally close this dark chapter, let the heavy, suffocating silence of the inner palace remain with you, a lingering reminder of the unseen costs of ancient empires built entirely on the absolute submission of the defeated. To ensure their remarkable endurance is never again relegated to the shadows of history, subscribe to the Dark Inquest History YouTube channel. Keep their fragile memory alive, bear unyielding witness to the pain of the past, and stand with us against the silences that history tried so desperately to hide.